Captain Sarah Chen stood before the Galactic Council's massive crystalline chamber, fighting back a yawn that threatened to undermine her entire presentation. The assembled representatives of 27 spacefaring civilizations watched with varying degrees of confusion and disbelief as she continued her report on human biological necessities. To summarize, she said, straightening her formal diplomatic uniform, humans require approximately 8 standard hours of sleep within each 24-hour cycle. During this time, we enter a state of unconsciousness for mental and physical recovery. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of translated outbursts, a hovering gelatinous being pulsed rapid shades of violet and green, its translator struggling to keep up with its agitated color speech. Impossible. Your species controls 17 strategic trade routes, maintains 6 quantum shipyards, and has revolutionized dimensional mathematics. How could you achieve this while spending 1/3 of your existence in a dormant state? Sarah resisted the urge to rub her eyes. The emergency council session had interrupted her normal sleep cycle, and the stimulant tablets from the medical bay were wearing thin. With respect, Representative Zix, we don't view sleep as dormancy. It's an essential biological process that enhances our cognitive capabilities. A towering silicon-based being stepped forward, its crystalline surface refracting light across the chamber. Perhaps there is a translation error. When you say unconscious, do you mean a state of elevated meditation? No, High Administrator, Sarah replied, bringing up a holographic display. During sleep, humans become completely unaware of our surroundings. Our conscious mind enters an altered state where we experience what we call dreams, a sort of neural processing period. The silicon being surface clouded with concern. You mean to tell us that for 8 hours each day, every human is effectively comatose, defenseless, unable to respond to emergencies? Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Not exactly. We maintain rotating shifts for essential services. While some humans sleep, others remain awake. We've developed our entire civilization around this cycle. A serpentine delegate uncoiled from its observation pod, scales shimming with bioluminescent patterns. This explains the mysterious, quiet periods we've observed in human space. We thought your species was conducting secret operations during these times. Just sleeping, Sarah confirmed, then quickly added, though we do have fully staffed monitoring stations operating at all times, we're not defenseless. The High Administrator's crystalline form pulsed with electromagnetic patterns that Sarah's translator interpreted as deep skepticism. Your species has pushed the boundaries of quantum engineering, developed revolutionary approaches to space-time manipulation, and established some of the most efficient trade networks in the galaxy, all while sleeping through 1/3 of it. Actually, Sarah said, pulling up another holographic chart, our sleep cycles might be one of the reasons for our innovations. During sleep, our brains process information differently. We often solve problems in our dreams that we couldn't solve while awake. The chamber fell silent as the assembled representatives processed this information. The gelatinous being had settled into a confused shade of blue. A demonstration might help, Sarah suggested. With the Council's permission, I'd like to introduce Dr. Marcus Wong, who can explain how his team solved the Helix Nebula crisis thanks to a solution that came to him in a dream. Before the Council could respond, Sarah's personal communicator chimed softly. She checked the display and couldn't help but smile at the irony of the message. Dr. Wong had just woken up from his scheduled sleep cycle and would be ready to present in 20 minutes. The High Administrator noticed her expression. Is something amusing, Captain Chen? Just human efficiency at work, she replied diplomatically. Dr. Wong will be here shortly, fresh from his sleep cycle and ready to share his insights. In the meantime, would the Council like to learn about another fascinating aspect of human sleep called power naps? The chamber erupted once again, and Sarah settled in for what promised to be a very long explanation of one of humanity's most basic and apparently most controversial biological functions. Dr. Enxithera adjusted her sensory membranes as she observed the human sleep laboratory for the 5th consecutive night. Her research team had spent the past month studying what they considered the most baffling aspect of human physiology, their requirement for regular unconsciousness. Subject 27 has entered REM sleep, reported her assistant, Kel, their bioluminescent patches pulsing with excitement. Neural activity is increasing, just like the others. The xenobiologist moved closer to the observation window, her tentacles wrapped tightly around her data tablet. Inside the chamber, the sleeping human's eyes darted rapidly beneath closed lids, their brain waves dancing across the monitoring screens in fascinating patterns. "Record everything," she instructed, especially the quantum field fluctuations around their hippocampus. "There's something about these dream states we're missing." The subject, a quantum engineer named Michael Jong, had volunteered for the study after the Galactic Council demanded a thorough investigation of human sleep patterns. His current brain activity suggested he was deep in what humans called a vivid dream. "Doctor," Kel chittered softly, "I'm detecting unusual patterns in the subject's prefrontal cortex. It's similar to the readings we observed during their breakthrough on the Hawking Gate project last week." Enxithera's species had engineered away their need for sleep thousands of years ago, considering it an evolutionary weakness. Yet here was evidence suggesting something remarkable. Humans were solving complex problems while unconscious. A soft chime indicated that Zhang was entering his wake cycle, right on schedule, exactly 8 hours after falling asleep. The consistency of human sleep patterns both impressed and puzzled the alien researchers. Zhang's eyes fluttered open, and he immediately reached for the notepad beside his bed. Another peculiar human habit they'd observed. Test subjects often awoke with what they called dream inspiration. "I think I've got it," Zhang announced, sketching rapidly. "The resonance cascade in the gate's particle matrix. I saw it in my dream. We've been approaching the calculations wrong." Enxithera activated the room's communication system. "Please elaborate, Engineer Zhang." "In my dream, I was playing chess with my grandmother," he explained, continuing to sketch. "But the chess pieces were quantum particles, and every time they moved, they left traces of probability waves. When I woke up, I realized we could apply the same principle to stabilize the gate's matrix." The xenobiologist exchanged glances with her team. Their own species solved problems through continuous logical progression, running scenarios without interruption until reaching a solution. This human method of unconscious problem-solving defied their understanding of efficient cognition. "Your species deliberately shuts down higher consciousness," Enxithera noted, "yet emerges with solutions that elude our most advanced AI systems. It's inefficient by every standard we know." Zhang smiled as he finished his sketch. "Sometimes the best way forward is to step back. Sleep lets us process information differently, make connections we might miss while awake." Later that day, Enxithera composed her daily report to the Galactic Council. Her findings were becoming increasingly difficult to reconcile with her species' long-held beliefs about cognitive efficiency. "Human sleep cycles appear to facilitate unique problem-solving methodologies," she wrote. "Their neural architecture undergoes significant reorganization during these periods, enabling creative solutions that linear processing might not achieve. Most remarkably, these patterns suggest that what we previously considered a primitive biological necessity might instead be an advanced evolutionary adaptation." She hesitated before adding her final observation. "Perhaps most concerning is the emerging evidence that our own species' elimination of sleep cycles may have inadvertently limited our cognitive flexibility. Additional research is recommended to determine if controlled periods of consciousness suspension might benefit our own problem-solving capabilities." As she transmitted the report, Enxithera noticed Engineer Zhang was already preparing for his next sleep cycle, completely unconcerned about the 8 hours of productivity he was about to lose. She wondered, not for the first time, if her species had been too hasty in declaring themselves more advanced than these fascinating, periodically unconscious beings. #humans rest for 8 hours a day and still dominate the galaxy. Emergency sirens wailed through the Galactic Council's Crisis Command Center as another dimensional rift tore open near the Orion trade routes. The center's massive holographic display showed a web of purple-black fissures spreading across 3 star systems, consuming everything in their path. High Administrator Zix's crystalline form pulsed with agitation. 3 weeks of continuous work, and we're no closer to containing this catastrophe. The rifts are multiplying faster than our models can predict. The Council's brightest minds have been working without pause since the first rift appeared. Their latest simulation crashed, sending cascading errors across the display screens. A gelatinous being in the corner had turned a sickly shade of gray from exhaustion, its calculations becoming increasingly erratic. "The human delegation has arrived," announced a synthetic voice. Dr. Marcus Wong entered the command center, looking irritatingly refreshed after his mandatory 8-hour sleep cycle. His team followed behind him, each member arriving at precisely scheduled intervals to maintain their rest rotations. "While you were unconscious," the High Administrator began, not bothering to hide their disdain. 3 new rifts opened in the Carina sector. Wong nodded, reviewing the data on his tablet. "And how long has your team been working on the containment calculations?" "We haven't stopped since the crisis began. Unlike some species, we don't waste time with unnecessary biological functions." The human scientist looked around the room, noting the signs of fatigue even in species that claim to need no rest. The quantum mathematics division's error rate had doubled in the past 48 hours, though none of them seemed to notice the decline in their work quality. "Permission to approach the main console?" Wong asked. The High Administrator waved a crystalline appendage in reluctant assent. Wong stepped forward, his well-rested mind quickly spotting patterns in the chaos of data streaming across the screens. "Your calculations are degrading," he pointed out, highlighting several sections of code. "The base algorithms are starting to show recursive errors. When was the last time anyone checked the fundamental assumptions?" "We don't need to check them," snapped a serpentine physicist, their scales dulled from weeks without proper maintenance. "The foundations are sound. The problem must lie in the execution." Wong shared a knowing look with his team. "I propose an experiment. Let our human team take over for the next 8 hours while your scientists take a brief recovery period." The suggestion met with immediate resistance. The council members argued that any break in their continuous work would lead to catastrophic failures in the containment fields. The rifts were spreading too quickly for anyone to stop and rest. "Look at your own data," Wong insisted, pulling up performance charts. "Your error rate has increased by 300% since the crisis began. You're not just failing to solve the problem, you're potentially making it worse." A tense silence fell over the command center, broken only by the steady alarm of another rift detection. 4 hours, the High Administrator finally conceded. "Half your proposed time. And only because we need to recalibrate our quantum processors." Wong smiled diplomatically, knowing that even a short break would prove his point. As the council scientists reluctantly withdrew, his human team smoothly transitioned into their positions, each member fresh and alert from their staggered rest periods. "Begin Level 1 diagnostic scan," he ordered. "Let's look at this problem with fresh eyes." Within the first hour, they discovered 3 critical errors in the base calculations, mistakes that had been amplified by weeks of compounded fatigue. By hour 3, they had developed a new approach to the containment field mathematics. When the council scientists returned, expecting to find disaster, they instead discovered the first real progress in weeks. The humans had established a stable containment protocol around the newest rift. "How?" demanded the High Administrator. "Sometimes," Wong explained, watching another team member leave for their scheduled rest period. "The most efficient path forward requires a step back. Now, shall we discuss implementing a shift rotation for your scientists?" The High Administrator's crystalline surface clouded with reluctant consideration as another alarm began to sound. Dr. Marcus Wong found himself walking through a corridor made of mirrors. His Each reflection showed a different dimensional rift, purple-black tears in reality stretching endlessly in every direction. In his hand, he held his daughter's kaleidoscope, a birthday gift he'd given her before leaving Earth for the crisis. He lifted the toy to its eye, and suddenly the rifts transformed. Through the kaleidoscope's fractured lens, he could see patterns emerging, mathematical constants hidden within the chaos. The rifts weren't random at all. They were following a complex geometric progression that looked suspiciously like. Wang jerked awake in his quarters aboard the Galactic Council station, his mind racing. The dream was already fading, but the fundamental insight remained. He grabbed his tablet, fingers flying across the surface as he sketched out the patterns he'd seen. "Computer, call Dr. Sarah Chen," he commanded, still drawing frantically. Sarah's hologram appeared, showing her at the command center. "Marcus, you're supposed to be in your sleep cycle for another hour." "The rifts," he said, sending her his sketches. "They're not random. They're following a fractal pattern, like the reflections in a kaleidoscope. Each new tear in spacetime is a mathematical reflection of the others." Her eyes widened as she reviewed his drawings. This could work, but the council won't like where the idea came from. "They'll like it better than watching their trade routes collapse," Wang replied, already pulling on his uniform. "Get the team together. And Sarah, bring your old geometry textbooks." 20 minutes later, Wang stood before the Crisis Command Center's main display, explaining his theory to an increasingly skeptical audience. "You expect us to accept a solution that came to you in a dream?" The High Administrator's crystalline form flickered with disbelief. "While you were unconscious." "The mathematics are sound," Wang insisted, projecting a complex series of equations. "The rifts aren't appearing randomly. They're following a predictable pattern of dimensional resonance. Like reflections in a kaleidoscope, each new rift is a geometric progression of the others." The serpentine physicist who had opposed him earlier raised their head with sudden interest. "These calculations, they align with our original containment theories, but from an entirely different perspective." "Exactly," Wang agreed. "We were treating each rift as an isolated incident, trying to contain them individually, but they're all connected through dimensional mathematics. If we can disrupt the geometric progression, we can collapse the entire network," finished Sarah, her fingers dancing across the console as she input the new calculations. "The fractal pattern becomes the key to its own undoing." A High Administrator moved closer to the display, their crystalline surface refracting complex patterns of light as they analyzed the mathematics. "This is elegant, surprisingly so, for a solution derived from an unconscious state. Sometimes we need to step back from a problem to see it clearly," Wang explained. "Human dreams aren't just random neural firing. They're our brains processing information in new ways, making connections we might miss while awake." The command center's main display suddenly flashed green as the new calculations finished processing. The simulation showed the rifts collapsing in sequence, each one falling into itself like a chain of dimensional dominoes. "It will work," declared the serpentine physicist, their scales shimmering with excitement. "The mathematical proofs are perfect." The High Administrator turned to Wang, their crystalline form pulsing with what might have been reluctant admiration. "Begin implementation immediately. And perhaps we should discuss your species' approach to problem-solving in more detail after the crisis is resolved." Wang smiled as he watched his team begin the containment procedures. Behind him, he could hear Sarah quietly explaining to a curious council member about the human concept of sleeping on it when faced with difficult problems. His daughter's kaleidoscope was still sitting on his bedside table back on Earth, its simple optical principles having inspired a solution to one of the greatest threats the galaxy had faced. Sometimes, he reflected, the most powerful discoveries came not from ceaseless work, but from allowing the mind time to dream. The Galactic Council's Grand Archive hummed with activity as Dr. Sarah Chen prepared for her presentation. The circular chamber, designed to house the combined knowledge of 27 civilizations, had never hosted a lecture on sleep before. The irony wasn't lost on her. "Your evidence is compelling," admitted Chief Scientist ZIL-9, their crystalline form refracting light, as they reviewed the data. "But surely these creative insights could be replicated by our quantum processing arrays." Sarah adjusted the holographic display, showing a series of brain scans taken during the dimensional rift crisis. "With respect, they cannot. Human sleep cycles offer something unique, a complete neural reset that allows for new cognitive pathways." The images shifted, displaying the stark difference between the fatigued alien scientists' thought patterns and the fresh, innovative solutions proposed by well-rested human teams. "Observe the neural activity during REM sleep," she continued, highlighting specific portions of the human brain scans. "Our minds don't simply shut down. They process information in ways that conscious thought cannot achieve." A serpentine elder, scales dulled from weeks of continuous work, raised their head. "Yet your species requires extensive recovery time. Our continuous consciousness allows for uninterrupted progress." "Does it?" Sarah challenged gently, bringing up the error rate charts from the crisis. "Your team's accuracy dropped by 60% after 2 weeks of continuous work. The decline was so gradual you didn't even notice it happening." The chamber fell silent as the assembled scientists studied the data. It was difficult to argue with the mathematical evidence of their own deteriorating performance. "Furthermore," Sarah continued, "we've discovered that human sleep patterns enhance our ability to recognize meta-patterns. During the crisis, Dr. Wang's dream state allowed him to see connections that continuous logical analysis had missed. A gelatinous being pulsed with skeptical colors. One fortunate insight during an unconscious state hardly proves systematic advantage." Sarah smiled, triggering the next display sequence. "Which is why we conducted a controlled study. Over the past month, we assembled mixed teams to solve complex theoretical problems. Teams following human rest patterns consistently outperformed those working continuously. The data streams told a clear story. Teams that took regular breaks showed higher rates of innovation, fewer errors, and more creative solutions to complex problems. But the most interesting finding was this," Sarah said, highlighting a particular dataset. "When members of your species began taking regular rest periods, not sleep as we know it, but simple conscious downtime, their performance improved dramatically." The chamber erupted in murmurs and electromagnetic pulses of surprise. The idea that rest could enhance rather than hinder progress challenged thousands of years of evolutionary development. "Your own historical records show similar patterns," Sarah pointed out. "Your greatest scientific leaps often came after periods of forced inactivity. Planetary storms, power failures, equipment malfunctions. These weren't setbacks. They were inadvertent rest periods that allowed for cognitive reset." Chief Scientist ZIL-9's surface rippled with thoughtful patterns. "You're suggesting that our drive for continuous consciousness may have actually limited our potential." "I'm suggesting that different species evolved different solutions," Sarah replied diplomatically. "Humans needed sleep for physical recovery, but we gained cognitive benefits in the process. Your species evolved past the physical need, but maybe lost something valuable along the way." She gestured to the final display, showing the successful containment of the dimensional rifts. The crisis proved that fresh perspectives can outperform continuous analysis. Perhaps it's time to consider that efficiency isn't always about maximizing active time. As the presentation concluded, Sarah noticed several council scientists discreetly checking their own performance metrics, comparing them against the baseline data she'd shared. The seed of doubt had been planted. Maybe their evolutionary advancement beyond sleep wasn't as advantageous as they'd always believed. A junior researcher approached her afterward, their crystalline form glowing with curiosity. "Dr. Chen, could you tell me more about this human concept of a power nap?" Sarah smiled. The revolution would begin with 20 minutes of rest at a time. The massive holographic display in the Quantum Gate Control Center tracked 12 simultaneous stabilization sequences across different star systems. Each sequence required perfect timing. A millisecond's delay could cause a cascade failure in the new dimensional barrier network. High Administrator 6 studied the human shift schedule with growing concern. You intend to rotate your operators every 8 hours. The synchronization requires constant attention. Commander Jack Torres smiled as he reviewed the crew assignments. Actually, we rotate every 6 hours to allow for proper handover procedures. Fresh minds make fewer mistakes. Preposterous, declared the crystalline being. Our operators can maintain focus indefinitely. We should handle the primary synchronization. Like you handled the crisis calculations. Torres asked quietly, bringing up the error rate charts that Dr. Chen had presented. The High Administrator's surface clouded briefly at the reminder. The first shift of human operators took their positions at the quantum interface stations. Each wore a small device that monitored their alertness levels, standard equipment since humanity had proven the correlation between fatigue and mathematical errors. Synchronization sequence beginning in 5 minutes, announced the control room's eye. All stations prepare for initialization. The alien observers watched with poorly concealed skepticism as the human team began their preparations. Each operator ran through their checklist with practiced efficiency, their movements precise and alert. First sequence locked, reported Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, her fingers dancing across the quantum interface. Dimensional resonance patterns stable at junction points 1 through 3. The High Administrator's crystalline form pulsed with surprise as the first set of stabilization fields activated perfectly. The human operators maintained their focus, each one handling their sector with practiced ease. Second sequence commencing, announced the AI, calculating interdimensional stress factors. Hours passed as the massive operation continued. True to their word, the human team rotated shifts precisely every 6 hours. Each handover was smooth, with fresh operators taking their positions after comprehensive briefings from their predecessors. Your species continues to confound expectations, admitted a serpentine physicist who had been monitoring the proceedings. We anticipated performance degradation during these transitions, yet each new team seems to bring enhanced clarity to their tasks. Torres nodded, watching as the third shift began their preparations. That's exactly the point. Each team arrives with fresh perspectives, able to spot potential issues that fatigue might mask. We learned long ago that continuous operation doesn't equal optimal performance. The quantum displays showed the stabilization network taking shape across the 12 star systems. The new operators quickly identified a potential resonance cascade in Sector 7, something the previous team had been tracking but couldn't quite resolve. Pattern recognized, called out the new shift supervisor. It's similar to the degradation sequence we saw during training, implementing compensation protocols. The High Administrator watched in silence as the humans efficiently solved a problem that had been building for hours. The solution seemed obvious now, but it had eluded the previous team as their shifts drew to a close. Your species treats rest as a tactical advantage, they finally observed, not merely a biological necessity. We had to, Torres explained. When we first reached the stars, we thought our need for sleep was a disadvantage, but we learned to turn it into a strength. Every handover is an opportunity for fresh analysis, every shift change a chance to catch what others might have missed. As if to prove his point, the newest team quickly optimized the power distribution across the network, improving efficiency by 7%. They approached the task with the clarity of well-rested minds, unburdened by the accumulated mental fatigue of previous hours. The stabilization network continued to grow, each sequence building upon the last with a precision that even the Council's most efficient operators had to admire. What had begun as a perceived weakness was proving to be humanity's hidden strength. Perhaps, the High Administrator conceded, watching another flawless shift transition. There is something to be learned from your methods after all. The Galactic Research Institute's meditation chamber wasn't designed for its current purpose. Originally built as a quantum observation room, its walls were lined with sensors meant to detect the smallest fluctuations in space-time. Now those same sensors recorded the brain patterns of the Institute's youngest researcher, Dr. Kylate, as they attempted something revolutionary: voluntary consciousness suspension. Brain wave patterns stabilizing, reported Dr. Sarah Chen, monitoring the readings with intense interest. Moving closer to what we consider a theta state in humans. The crystalline researchers' form had taken on an unusual translucency, their usually brilliant surface dimmed to a soft glow. Around them, other members of their species watched with a mixture of fascination and concern. Neural pathways are shifting, observed Dr. Marcus Wong, comparing the readings to human sleep patterns. It's not exactly like our REM sleep, but there are remarkable similarities. The High Administrator drifted closer to the observation window, their own crystalline form pulsing with barely contained anxiety. Are we certain this is safe? No member of our species has experienced consciousness suspension since our ancient evolutionary phase. We're detecting no signs of distress, Sarah assured them, though she kept a careful eye on the monitors. Kylate is pioneering something remarkable here, a bridge between our different approaches to cognitive processing. Inside the chamber, Kylate's form continued to dim until it reached a state of deep translucency. The quantum sensors recorded complex patterns of neural activity, unlike anything seen before in their species. Look at these cognitive pathways, Wong pointed out, highlighting several readings. Their brain is processing information in entirely new ways. The patterns suggest. He trailed off as Kylate's form suddenly brightened, consciousness returning with unexpected swiftness. The young researcher's surface rippled with patterns that the translator struggled to interpret. The equations, Kylate announced, their voice filled with excitement. I saw them differently. All the quantum variables we've been struggling with. They're not separate at all. They're interconnected through a fifth-dimensional resonance we never considered. The research team rushed to record the mathematical insights pouring from the newly awakened scientist. The formulas described an entirely new approach to quantum mechanics, one that had eluded their civilization's brightest minds for centuries. This is remarkable, the High Administrator admitted, reviewing the equations. But surely it's an anomaly. One insight during consciousness suspension doesn't validate. 7 other researchers have reported similar breakthroughs, Sarah interrupted gently, displaying a series of research logs. Each after experiencing their own version of rest states, the evidence is becoming difficult to ignore. Throughout the Institute, more young researchers had begun experimenting with consciousness suspension. Each session yielded new insights, fresh perspectives on problems that had stumped their continuous consciousness approach. We're not suggesting you adopt human sleep patterns exactly, Wong explained to the gathered scientists. But your species might benefit from developing your own unique forms of neural reset periods. Kylate's surface rippled with mathematical equations as they attempted to describe their experience. It was like seeing our universe from outside our normal reference frame. All the patterns we missed became suddenly obvious. The High Administrator's form flickered with thoughtful patterns. Centuries of evolution had led their species to believe that continuous consciousness was the peak of development. Yet here was evidence that their ancient capacity for consciousness suspension might have held unexpected value. Perhaps, they conceded, watching another young researcher prepare for their own rest experiment. Evolution isn't always a straight line forward. Sometimes we must reclaim what was lost to find new paths ahead. Sarah smiled as she adjusted the chamber settings for the next session. Across the galaxy, other species had begun their own experiments with various forms of rest states. What had started as a curious human weakness was transforming into a revolution in cognitive science. Ready to begin next session, she announced as more crystalline researchers gathered to observe. The future of galactic science was changing, one rest period at a time. Captain Sarah Chen stood once again before the Galactic Council chamber, exactly one standard Earth year after her first presentation about human sleep patterns. This time, she wasn't fighting back a yawn. She'd made sure to get a full 8 hours of rest before the historic session. The results of the Galactic Rest State Initiative have exceeded all projections, she announced, gesturing to the holographic displays surrounding the chamber. Over 2,000 research teams across 27 civilizations have developed specialized forms of consciousness suspension adapted to their unique biologies. The High Administrator's crystalline form glowed with an inner light that would have been impossible a year ago, a side effect of their species' newly developed rest cycles. The productivity increases are undeniable. Our quantum research division has made more breakthroughs in the past 6 months than in the previous 5 years. Sarah nodded, bringing up the next set of data streams. Each species has found their own optimal pattern. The crystalline races developed quantum resonance cycles, while the energy beings discovered the benefits of periodic power fluctuations. A serpentine elder, their scales now gleaming with healthy iridescence, raised their head. Even our bioengineered improvements couldn't match the efficiency of natural rest cycles. We were so focused on continuous operation that we never considered the advantages of periodic reset states. The chamber's displays showed the transformation across the galaxy. Space stations had been modified to accommodate different species' rest requirements. Trade routes now operated on carefully coordinated shift schedules. Even the Galactic Council itself had adopted a rotating session system to ensure fresh perspectives on every decision. The most surprising outcome, Sarah continued, has been the cultural exchange. Each species' unique approach to rest has taught us something new about consciousness itself. Dr. Kylate, now head of the Consciousness Studies Division, stepped forward to share their findings. Their crystalline form, pulsed with the measured rhythm they had discovered, enhanced their cognitive functions. Humans showed us that rest isn't weakness, they declared. It's a fundamental pattern of the universe itself. Even stars have cycles. Even quantum particles have states of rest. We were trying to transcend nature when we should have been learning from it. The chamber hummed with agreement. The past year had seen a renaissance in galactic science, art, and philosophy. Species that had once looked down on humanity's need for sleep were now scheduling their own rest periods with the same precision they'd once applied to continuous work schedules. There have been some amusing adaptations, Sarah noted with a smile. The Council's energy beings became particularly fond of what they call power fluctuation naps, though we're still trying to convince them that 3 minutes isn't quite what we meant by a short rest. Gentle laughter rippled through the chamber. Even the High Administrator's surface sparkled with amusement, another new development since they'd discovered the benefits of regular consciousness suspension. But perhaps the most important lesson, Sarah concluded, is that strength comes in many forms. What seems like weakness in one context can be an advantage in another. The key is learning to recognize and adapt these differences, not eliminate them. She gestured to the final display, showing the galaxy's productivity and innovation metrics since the introduction of species-specific rest cycles. The upward trend was unmistakable. A year ago, you questioned how humanity could compete while sleeping away a third of our existence, she reminded them. Now we understand that we never succeeded despite our need for sleep. We succeeded because of it. The High Administrator rose, their crystalline form radiating the calm clarity that came with proper rest. The Council formally recognizes the Universal Rest State Protocol as a fundamental right of all species. Furthermore, we propose establishing a new research division dedicated to consciousness cycle studies, with humanity as our founding partners. Sarah smiled as the chamber erupted in approval. Around her, representatives of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations were already checking their schedules, ensuring they wouldn't miss their next rest period. Humanity had done more than prove their place among the stars. They had taught the galaxy how to sleep, and in doing so, helped it awaken to new possibilities.